Today, we will focus on the 3D renderer thick lines. As its name suggests, thick lines will affect the lines, meaning the edges. In the case of a mesh, like the cube here, we see that it is actually the wireframe of the object. If what interests us is simply the wireframe, there is a specific renderer named wireframe. However, we notice that the thick lines renderer includes more parameters that we will detail together. We will start by reducing the number of subdivisions so that we can see a bit more clearly. So we will go back to the cube generator and decrease the precision. Let's set it to, say, 4 to better understand what is happening. Within the thick lines renderer, the first parameter is the presets. We can test the various presets that exist. For example, barbed wire will create a barbed wire effect, and bramble, which creates a bramble effect with thorns like this, or simply a uniform, which makes it easier to explain other parameters, so we will use the default parameter. For now, we can see that these lines are very sharp, very white compared to the black background. It's because the auto-illuminate setting is at 100%. If I change it and set it to, for example, 0%, we will see a shadow effect. For example, I can add a directional light, and if I rotate this light, we will see that the shadows will react to the orientation of the light. I can delete this light. Let's revert to 100%. The thickness is simply the thickness of the lines, and I see that there is actually a perspective effect. So if I zoom in, this line occupies more pixels when close to the camera compared to when it's further away. If I wish to ensure a constant pixel size without taking perspective into account, I can activate constant size in pixels. We can notice that the lines in the back and the lines in front take the same amount of pixels now. Let's revert to perspective, and we will look into the other parameters later. Now, let's see how the renderer thick lines works with other types of 3D objects. We can delete the cube. We saw that this renderer affects edges. Therefore, objects composed solely of points that don't have any edges cannot utilize this renderer. The most suitable type of objects for this renderer is therefore splines made solely of edges. For example, we will create a circle to better understand how textures are applied. We see that the thick lines renderer is the default renderer for spline elements. We can find all the same settings. I will make the line thicker so we can see better. What will interest us this time is the second element created inside the object, which is the texture coordinates, and it's currently of type function. To understand what this means, let's begin by changing the texture for a linear gradient. And I will rotate it 90 degrees using a 2D transform. We can clearly see how the texture begins here and ends there. If I go into the renderer settings, I see that I can change the location where the texture starts using the texture offset. I can also select the number of repetitions. If I want more options on how the texture are applied, I can go to the texture coordinates parameters in the function tab. By default, it is a linear function. We will change the wrap mode to repeat. Now, if I adjust the offset, in the same way, it will shift the point where the texture starts. I can also change the number of repetitions. We can see that there is a sudden jump here, going directly from black to white. So we can change the function type to, for instance, triangle, to create a gradual shift from white to black, then from black to white, etc. We can even switch, for example, to sinus, which will further smooth out the transition, or even decide to have a random repetition of the texture using noise.